Well, hello again. This is Bob Buckley at True 32 Corporation, and this is another of a series of videos on KCD version 9. And this one is going to be primarily on cut listing options and some of the details about our cut listing, whether it's CNC or manual. So it also will discuss cabinet types in the relationship to the cut listing for those cabinet types. What you see here are basically all of the angled cabinet options, this being a wall angled cabinet, this being a base angled cabinet, a vanity linen, a standard, or this is a vanity base, and then this is a base, and these are tall. Let's look at these face on and you can get a better feel. If I wanted you to see the shape first though. So looking across the bottom here, we've got a vanity base, a vanity linen or bathroom linen, a base cabinet, tall base, and these are just the opposites over here, and then our two uppers left and right, and of course they're triangular shaped, but we want to look at several details. The first thing we've added in version 9, or changed about version 9 of the True 32 library in 9.01 and 9.02 is that when we come here to True 32 part listing and edit, we have moved the drawer box options down here into the quick load section. They are no longer in the settings portion of the program, and we've separated them. So now we have a 5-piece with an undermount guide, a dovetail with an undermount guide, a Nova 1, Nova 2, and I'll explain the difference in those either later in this video or in another video, a tandem box, and a Zargan 1 and a Zargan 2. So now the drawers are independent from the pullouts. You see pullouts here is one of the options. So you'll control these, and typically you don't need to come to these areas, but these are where they're set up. When we click on any one of these items, then we have all the settings for that item here in this screen, and many of the things that have been hidden in the past are now visible to you, and now you're able to adjust them if you need to. So a lot of these items lived in the settings, made the settings very long to have all of these drawer types in the settings, and they're not things that typically changed on a job-by-job basis, so they didn't really need to be in the settings. The advantage to settings over quick load is a global setting. If we make a change here, then if we need to change it, if we want to do something different in this job but not in future jobs, we would have to remember, if we change this to 59, to come back before we start the next job and change this back to 58, or this 5 to 6, or any of these numbers, any of these changes we make, they're global. They are for every future job. In the settings area, when we make a change, it is job specific. So if we were to change this file drawer end from 246 to 256 in the settings area, then when the next time we started a new job, it would be back to 246. If we changed it here in the quick load area from 246 to 256, the next time we started a new job, it would be 256 unless we came here and changed it back. So these are the new drawer standards here and the pullout standards, and they are separate now. There's also a couple other areas we have more control over, but we'll talk about those in future videos. But under the True 32 part listing, if you hit edit now, you'll go to that area we were just at and be able to make some changes to your quick load files. Also, when we come here to calculate the cut list for this particular project, we now have a choice on the drawers. Instead of having to remember to go to settings to set your drawer type, we now have a question that pops up, and there's two separate questions. This question here is specific to drawer boxes. So you're selecting your drawer box method, and here you have all of your options. 5-piece undermount, dovetail undermount, Nova, all the items we saw in that list are here available. And the real advantage to this is we can have a different, I just okayed the Zargan pullout. Now we could say, but we want a different pullout option. We could come in here and say we want a Nova Pro pullout or a dovetail pullout. Typically where this is useful, some people want to use a Nova Pro drawer and a Zargan pullout. But you can now have a different pullout selection, and it's any of the options in either case. So we'll okay those. and look at the cut list for these angled cabinets. And I've spent a lot of time in this section really going over the fine details of each and every part, part names, part naming conventions, edge banding indicators, trying to get these as accurate as possible, and in the cases where it was impossible to get them perfect, and again try to come up with something that was reasonable. Now as I open up these additional windows, you're going to have to see me or take just a few seconds here to adjust these to be able for you to be able to see some of these things. In some of these windows I can't shrink, so I'm hoping I can get the things for you to be able to see as much of it as possible. That they won't shrink within my window settings. So here we're seeing, and it looks like that's going to kind of run outside of that. I may have to move this over a little bit. So we're seeing the actual base adjustable shelf, and all of these parts now we're using a generic three-letter nomenclature along with a name that has a suffix on it. So in this case, all base adjustable shelves are called BAJ, base adjustable shelves, but we have a suffix of angle, and if it were a clip cabinet it would say clip, and if it were a 45 cabinet it would say 45, if it was a pie cut cabinet it would say pie. So now we have on our printed cut lists and on our printed nested patterns little extra indicators telling us what these are. I'm going to slide that over just a little more, and you can here see the edge banding indicator and the cabinet number. So this part is an adjustable shelf for cabinet number 1, and it's telling us that there's the cabinet number 1 indicator, and then here's the edge banding indicator telling the operator to band this edge. So for the CNC guys, they're going to get indicators of where the edge banding goes on the part, written with the 5mm V-point bit that would be used also to drill the 5mm holes. For the manual guys, there will actually be a note, the part description, and then a note saying to cut this angle and refer to the operations manual or an actual fence setting, one of the two. So I'm going to run through these parts just so we can kind of see some of the machining for those that aren't familiar with True 32. Now we're looking at the base bottom, and we're actually seeing the 15mm holes for the leg levelers. And again, we see this is for cabinet number 1, and we have the edge banding indicator. And then this is our base side left. Again, you're not going to be able to see all of this part. Maybe I can get it where you can. We just can't see the part name. So this is a base side left, and we're seeing our hinge holes and our machine specific or associated machining for the shelf holes, and then our pilot holes. And in this particular case, because this cabinet is triangular shaped, we've basically got two side panels that get screwed together to create the back and the side. And so I want to hide this part. Normally it hides behind the back. We usually have a back groove in here, and it hides behind the back. But this is the short side here. So this side, the other piece screws to the back edge of this one, so I'm actually hiding this part indicator where it's telling us that this is the end panel for cabinet number 1 and telling us to band the bottom, front face, and top of this panel. This is going to be hidden by the top when we screw the top on. Then when we get to the long side of the two, the one that's longer, this ID, or an indicator, ID for part number 1 and the edge banding indicators, is going to be hidden by that other part when we screw it on. And we also have pilot holes to screw that on, and then we have the pilot holes across the top and bottom, and our hinge holes there. And then we have our, looks like our top, and we have again part indicators and edge band indicators. And I'm going to slide that back over just a little bit so I can see what we've got. We'll skip past the parts that are self-evident, and we also are seeing all of our hardware. Alright, and this is just a repeat of the next cabinet, so I'm going to pop out of here and close that. So now you saw those parts specific to this cabinet. Now I'm going to go to the second grouping that I want to look at as far as cut listing specific, and that's going to be base, microwave, and warming drawer cabinets. Basically, I've taken each unique group type as I work on them and created a job file specific to them. So this is a new cabinet group that I've pulled from True 32 or from the Frameless library, the KCD Frameless library. They had added a cooktop cabinet that allowed you to have a warming drawer or microwave under it, which is not very practical, probably wouldn't work, but I was able to turn the cooktop off and create a very useful cabinet. So here we have a warming drawer over a drawer, a warming drawer over pair doors, a microwave over a drawer, and these are kind of planning on either a built-in microwave or a microwave with trim kit. We'd have a top rail and a bottom rail, so we have some areas and we can control these, and I'll show you how that works in just a minute. And then we have a microwave over a pair of doors. Of course, this one's going to be limited to the height of your microwave. You're not going to be able to hinge doors that get to this size. So if your microwave is very large, obviously this wouldn't work. You'd want to use the drawer option. And then we have, these represent the microwave drawer units that pull out. In those, we don't need a top rail that we can control. We can just use our regular 19mm top rail, and then we're allowing this bottom reveal, although we have a larger rail there, we're allowing this bottom reveal to be whatever the top reveal is, and it makes for a very attractive looking unit. And then we have this unit with the drawer and this unit with a pair of doors. And if we go to level 4 and zoom in on one of these, or these two anyway, we can actually see here that we're seeing a 19mm reveal here and a 19mm reveal there, but in reality we have a 19mm standard rail at the top of this one, where we're actually seeing the front edge, and this thing's actually 108mm wide, turned flat. But here we have a rail more like a face frame rail that's turned vertical, and it's 58mm tall. When we turn the doors off, you can actually see that rail. And in this next, in version 9, 9.02 anyway, all of these dimensions are now correct. They weren't correct before. We had actually cheated this rail height, and we didn't have the icons for the appliances. Basically, whatever the top rail was, the bottom rail had 20mm added to it, and all of this math was wrong because we didn't have control over it then. But I've added all of the fields that needed to be added and given it you complete control over this cabinet. So when we look at this cabinet in the dialog box, let me turn the door back on, you can actually see here how much control you have. And I've tried to have reordered all of these dialog boxes, especially these cabinets like this and the oven cabinet, so that this, as you come down this box, it's the order of the cabinet. So we see this rail over the microwave drawer is 19mm tall, and we see that. And then the microwave drawer opening height is 376mm. And then we have our rail under the microwave that is 58mm. And then we have our micro drawer reveal, which is the space from the drawer to the bottom of the microwave, that 19, and you have control over that. Now, the calculating fields are this bottom rail and the drawer opening height. They just calculate as you make these other changes. And a couple of things that are specific to KCD that that are very useful is anytime you see this caret sign, then that means this particular field, and we see that here with the drawer front height, and we also see that with the cabinet height, can be incremented up or down in increments of 32 so that we stay in system. So if we click on this field and then double click with our primary mouse button, it goes up 32mm. You saw that go from 878 to 910. If we double click with our secondary button, it goes in the opposite direction, so it came back down. Same thing would be of this drawer front. If we made this drawer front smaller, we see that that drawer front is 317mm currently with a 19mm top rail and a 58mm bottom rail. If we double click on this field with the secondary button, it goes down 19, and then we see this filler is going to stay the same, but this filler is going to get larger to make up for the difference. We're still only going to show this 19mm here, but that filler is going to move down. And if we typically what you would do is you would make this smaller if you wanted this opening larger for a different unit. But most of these, between Wolf, Sharp, and I believe there's one other, maybe Decor, somebody else also has a microwave warming drawer. I know Wolf's is electronic. You push a button and it opens by itself. Sharp, you pull it out. But there's at least one other, and they're all within 5 or 6mm of each other on this opening height. But you can adjust that opening height to whatever your microwave drawer opening is, and then you can increment this drawer till you get a filler here that's acceptable. We really don't want these fillers in the warming drawer cabinets or the oven cabinets to get much smaller than 52 millimeters. And here we see that it was 58 with a 317 bottom drawer. So that's a pretty effective drawer. But if you get too much smaller than that, it's kind of hard to get a couple staples and screws in it. We've got a pilot hole for the screw in the center, and then we hope to get a couple staples in it. But anything smaller than that's probably going to knife open. So you want to try to maintain that in the oven cabinets and warming drawer cabinets. So, and again, as you see, these are ordered in the order they happen in the cabinet, top to bottom. There's also, if you actually had a unit and you needed to, now this one I know would not work with with a cooktop above it, but possibly some of these others over here could. You know, maybe this warming drawer or this microwave could, if you made this top rail tall enough, and you have full control over all that. So if you did want this to be a cooktop cabinet, you just come down here to the bottom, and I've left the cooktop down here, and if you said this cooktop was 30 inches wide on that cabinet, actually it probably would be less than that. Let's say minus 52, 710, and said OK. Then you see the cooktop here, and then when we go overhead, you see the cooktop. So you have the ability to turn that cooktop back on if you actually have to make that work as a cooktop cabinet, just by filling in that field. Also, you can have a pull-out in this cabinet or this cabinet, or you can have an adjustable shelf in those cabinets if it'll fit, any of these cabinets with doors at the bottom. All right, let's go to the next cabinet type. Well, let's look at the cut list for this one, the things that are unique about it. We'll go part listing, and again we're going to see our drawer questions pop up. And so if we wanted dovetail drawers, we could choose that, or Nova drawers. Let's say we wanted Nova drawers and pull-outs. Alright, and I'm going to slide this over and try to give you as much of it as possible. So here's our base back, and on our back we see the cabinet number to tell us that, and this is going to be on the back side of the back. And then here's our base bottom, and you can't see the far side, but you can see that we have, actually I can slide it over a little more and you can see that. You can see the leg leveler holes and the cabinet number and the edge banding, saying edge band that edge. Here's our base fixed shelf. This is the shelf beneath that appliance, whether it's a microwave or warming drawer. And it's also got the edge banding indicator and has a little additional information. So it doesn't just tell us that it's for cabinet number 1, since it might be hard to distinguish this from a bottom or a adjustable shelf. So this actually tells you that this is the fixed shelf. And this is our base side left. Now there's some machining that has been missing in some of the other versions that is now here for the CNC guys. So we're seeing the drawer guide holes here for the Nova Pro. We're seeing our pilot holes for our bottom. We're seeing our back groove here. We're seeing our part indicator with the edge banding indicators around that. Here's our pilot holes for our nailer. Here's our pilot hole for our top rail. Here's our pilot hole for our mid rail. And we also have an indicator here. This is just a very light scratched line into the material to tell the guy assembling the cabinet where this fixed shelf goes. Instead of using a mortise and tenon, we're just real quick coming down through there with that V-bit and scratching a line to tell them this is the bottom of that fixed shelf, and then we have pilot holes for that fixed shelf. A lot of these specialty cabinets were missing some of this machining in the last version, and this has all this, everywhere, whether it's pilot holes for rails or whatever. They're all here now. This is the right side for the same cabinet. This is a drawer bottom, and this is one of the things that's somewhat unique to True 32 in that we're actually pocketing out this material, this whole distance. Where you see this rectangle here, this whole area gets pocketed out from 19 millimeters thick down to 16, so we can nest our drawer bottoms for our Nova Pro and Zargan drawers along with our cabinet parts. We want to use 19 millimeter material, but the Nova Pro system was made to work with 16 millimeter material, so we're just pocketing out this edge where it interfaces with the drawer guide, and then putting pilot holes for where your screws go down to 16, and so you can use 19 millimeter material, nest it with all of your other parts. Let's see if we can stand. And then here's our drawer end. Again, it's pocketed out on each side, taking the 19mm material in this entire rectangular area down to 16 to be used with the Nova Pro system. It's got a pilot hole to screw it to the drawer guide. It's got edge banding indicator to edge band this edge. It's got pilot holes to tie this back to the bottom. And here's our nailer for this particular cabinet. And because this cabinet is a warm and drawer cabinet, has a top rail, all the nailers now have a pilot hole here to tie the nailer to the top rail so that the nailer doesn't just bow with the wall. But in this case, because this cabinet doesn't have rails, it's more like a sink cabinet, that pilot hole automatically goes away. But we'll see it on some of the other cabinets. And then this is our warm and drawer rail above the warm and drawer, and then we see this is the rail below. It's actually 20mm larger to give the door something to close against. And then here's our back for the next cabinet, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to close out of that and go to the next group. It's our blind cabinet group. And these are potential blind cabinets. We have a blind panel here, this being the left unit, this being the right unit, and this being the wall left and right. See overhead here what we've got, and there's representing the doors. And some of the machining on this was not working exactly right, so I've spent a lot of time working on that, so I'm going to try to go through that cut list for you. Some of this is instructional for True 32 guys, and some of it is just informative to those that aren't familiar with how True 32 works and how the True 32 library for KCD works, for those that are interested. And some of the True 32 guys that aren't CNC guys probably are interested in how some of this CNC stuff works. So here's our base adjustable shelf, and again it's got a part ID and edge banding indicator. There's our back with our part ID. There's our base bottom with all of the leg leveler holes. From here on out, I'm not going to go over each part. I'm just going to kind of point out the specialty parts or specialty machining. So here we're looking at the blind panel for the blind cabinet, and we got a little additional machining on here. Of course, we've got hinge holes for the blind panel, and these holes are controlled by a variable that you set. And so you can tell it that these holes need to be at 55 or 64 or 37 or 14 or wherever they need to be based on the hinge system you use. You have control over the position of these holes. Right now, obviously, they're set at 37 because they're aligning with the shelf holes, but this is just additional support for that shelf. This cabinet would have a left end and a right end with shelf holes, but this comes across the face of that cabinet, and this just gives kind of center support for that shelf. And then we have our edge banding indicators, and if you say you don't edge band the bottom, then there wouldn't be an edge band indicator here. If you say you don't edge band the top, then there wouldn't be an edge band indicator here. You just have the front, or any combination of that. You could even edge band the back. All the indicators are there, and you set it to what you want it to be, and once you do, those indicators will be there for your operator. This arrow is telling the finish guy that this panel is different than a lot of others in that we've done some machining on this side, but the other side is the side that you're going to see. So that's the side that needs to be finished. So that arrow is just telling the finish operator that he needs to spend all his time getting the other side really nice as opposed to this side. And these are in panels, and we see here, because this is a blind left, we don't have any drawer guide holes because we don't need a drawer guide on this left side of this one. There's a blind panel there. But we do see on the right that not only do we have the drawer guide holes, but we also have an indicator for the rail that runs from this panel to the partition for this cabinet. So all of the machining that used to be on this part that was not needed and some could be confusing is now gone, and the machining that you do need is here. Additional machining like the rail indicators, and these have been turned on in a lot of other places. You also notice that we now have 2 pilot holes for nailers and rails for any of the current True 32 users. This is back to the Zargan drawer here. And there's our drawer end. And then this is our drawer partition. This, and I'll show you on the cabinet as soon as we get out of here, but these are the drawer guide holes, and this is saying to edge band the face and this edge here, which is the top, the part that you would see. And where that goes, that's really all of the parts for this particular cabinet. So what we've got, this is the blind panel. Well, this is the cabinet we were looking at. So this is the blind panel on the face here that we were looking at that would be cut from exterior material and be finished. You're going to see about 76 millimeters of this blind panel. And then we also have a partition right here in this area. If we turn the doors and drawers off, that partition is going to sit right in that area right there, and the drawer guide is going to hang on it. So this rail here is running all the way to the other side panel, but this rail is only running to the underneath, and it's the indicator how long or where that partition goes. And it's sitting right there, and that partition sits there and holds the other side of that drawer. And then you saw that we had shelf holes on the back side of this blind panel. You see where it would be supporting the shelf right in the center. So the longer this cabinet gets, the more useful that feature is. So that's how the blind cabinets work and all the machining for those. Let's move on to the next one. We have clipped cabinets, very similar to angled cabinets in many ways, but also different than angled cabinets. These do have a 45-degree angle on them, but we also have a flat end panel on them. So everything about this cabinet and the angle cabinet have been separated because of the variations that come with this. Because this cabinet does get a back, the other one does not. The back is one of the side panels. So now let's take, and that's the shape of the cabinet from the top, and these are all the different varieties of this cabinet again. This is probably let me pop back over here. Yeah, this is the base, and then vanity. So this is a base clip, this is a vanity clipped, and this is a linen, linen tall, and then a kitchen tall, and then the reverse of all these, and then the two walls. Let's look at the parts for these, see the things that are unique about them. Again, we're going to get our drawer questions, and we'll just leave them as are. There's no drawers in any of this. Excuse me. These are pretty complicated cabinets, but they become very simple to manufacture in the CNC world, and fairly simple in the manual world, in that we're really giving you a lot of instruction on the cut list. If we look at a manual cut list, which we will of one of these cabinets. Slide this up where you can see most of it. That may be a little too far for me to be able to tell what I'm looking at. So this is an adjustable shelf. So we see a somewhat odd-shaped part. This is for cabinet number 1, and we have an edge banding indicator telling us to edge band this area. And there's our back, and there's our bottom. Again, the edge banding indicator telling us. Here's our short side, and in this case, this one does have a hinge that requires the hinge to be moved back from 37. So it is set to whatever it needs to be for that particular model and brand of hinge. But this cabinet does have nailers. The other one did not, but so it had holes all the way to attach the two parts together. This one actually has nailer pilot holes. And there's our deep side for the same cabinet. And then our top for that cabinet. And the tall cabinets obviously have a fixed shelf for those. Let's go on to our next cabinet type. So here we've got diagonal cabinets. We've got several different versions of the diagonal cabinet. And look here, we've got a base diagonal left and right, and an upper diagonal left and right. And then when we pop around here, we see we have a upper with a door over a door with a fixed shelf in the center. So those are your options for these diagonal cabinets. And when we go to our parts for these cabinets, again, we'll get our drawer questions. Even though we don't have any drawers in these cabinets, still going to have to answer those questions each time. And I may get a few errors in one of these jobs because not all of these have been updated to the latest version, but if I see an error, I'll be able to correct that very quickly and move on and show you how everything works with these. So here we got an adjustable shelf for a diagonal cabinet. You see that we've got it clipped at the back and the front. For the manual guys, we've made certain that on these base cabinets that this dimension from 0, 0 to this face, which is, this would be your fence setting here if you were having to saw this, is equal at the front and the back. They're one and the same. So once you make your fence setting, you just rotate the part and cut it again, and you've gotten both. And the CNC guys, that really doesn't matter, but it's so helpful to the manual guys that we just made it universal, and so everyone gets the same thing. So this clip is identical front and back on all the diagonals, the base diagonals anyway. The uppers wouldn't make sense. It would basically ruin the cabinet, but on this one it does not, and so we've done that. This makes it easier to get in the door. But again, we see the part number in the edge banding indicator. There's our back, and we're going to have 2 of those. There's back 1, there's back 2. And then there's our bottom, and in this case this is one of the new features, and you can turn it on and off, but after one of our clients recommended that we bore pilot holes for some of the accessories on the bottom, and I said, well, we can't, because we're boring these 15 or 10 millimeter holes for our leg levelers, so we're actually boring from the bottom of the bottom. We can't bore something that would be inside the cabinet. And he said, well, if it's a pilot hole, we could just bore all the way through. And I said, yeah, well, you're right. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not going to hurt a thing if there's some holes that go all the way through on the bottom of a base cabinet. So that thought process followed through with this cabinet. We could also get our back groove and bore these all the way through and be able to get both machining. And then just in this one cabinet, we would go in there and actually put caps on these holes. But it would also give us the luxury of being able to adjust our leg levelers from above on this one cabinet. So there's now an option, and I'll show you that as soon as I get out of the cut listing, where you can toggle that on and off, and these holes go away. If you don't like that option, then you would just get the back grooves, and you would place your leg levelers manually with a jig of some sort. Then again, this one, the diagonal corner cabinet, has odd hinge placements for that particular model, but again, it could be wherever you want it. You have control over where that goes. And then let's see what else we have here. And then there's our top, and it's got the back grooves, and again the part ID and the edge band indicator. And then this is our diagonal corner support, and a little additional machining's been added. Prior to this very latest version, you didn't have your edge banding indicators on the diagonal corner support, but you really do need to edge band this, and we try to edge band it as it's a rectangular part before we bevel these edges. As soon as it comes off the router, we edge band the top and the bottom, and then we take it to the saw and cut the 45-degree bevel on this. And on the cut list and the nested pattern, there's a note about cutting those 45-degree bevels on the diagonal corner support. But this part goes back here at the back of the cabinet, and the back lays on top of it. And then if we double click on one of these base cabinets and we go to options, we see here that we have an option called through bore 45 pi, or 45 and pi. It's for both of those cabinets, the 45 diagonal corner cabinet and the pi cut corner cabinet. The leg socket holes. If we uncheck that, say OK, and then come back and look at our parts, and this time I'm going to just look at the parts for cabinet number 1, since I don't need to look at all of them. It'll calculate just a little bit quicker that way. And when we get to our base bottom, actually that is not working, so I'll have to check to see what's going on with that. But that will turn those holes off. Oh, actually it doesn't. Yeah, it does. It turns them off. So I've just got it not hooked up yet on this particular version. It's probably because this job is older. But that option has been created, and I just haven't gotten it functioning yet. I thought I had, but I have not. So let's go to the next cabinet group. I apologize for this getting so long, but I really want to cover all these different cabinet options on the same video. Obviously, none of my videos are going to make it to YouTube because they have a limit of 10 minutes, but I want to try to get as many like things in the same video as I possibly can. So that we don't have 20 videos to see one subject matter. All right, these are all of our different, I know this is a little overwhelming, but these are all of our different potential drawer types within the True 32 library. So a single drawer, this obviously being a double drawer, file drawer typically is how that would be used, and this is also a file drawer situation where it's 2 over a single file. This is file over file. This is just a 2 drawer base. This is a 2 vertical drawers, side by side over a pair of doors, but no partition. Turn the doors off there. There's no partition. The shelf still goes full length. We have double partitions there for simplicity, and we'll see that on the cut list. Turn the doors back on. And then we have drawer over pair of doors, 3-drawer stack, double drawers over 2 deep drawers, and a 4-drawer stack in a 2 over 2 configuration, and a 3 over 2 configuration, and 5 and 6 drawers. Very seldom use these 5 and 6 drawers, just usually closet type applications. But all of these different drawer options have some unique machining to them as far as CNC guys go, and obviously we have some unique parts for the manual guys too, in that we have these short partitions in these double units here, and we've got tall backs in the back of the drawers for file drawers. But let's look at the parts for these real quick. And I'm going to just scan through this list since there's so many variations here, but I primarily want to show you one thing, and that is that I've added the rail option for any of you True 32 users that have wanted to be able to put locks in lower drawers. You've not had the option for rail, although the machining and part listing for that has just been turned off up until recently. But now you have, and I've turned it on for all of these cabinets, so not only will we see that we have rails in between every drawer, the default is that they're not on, but I've turned them on for all these drawers so we can see the machining and so we can see the parts. Because if you got to lock those drawers, then you're going to need that. All right, I'm going to try to slide over here as far as I can so you can see as many as you can. This is that first cabinet's back, so it's a short back. There's the bottom, left side, and this is just a little short back on here. But again, we see the nailer, the rail, pilot holes for the bottom, or these pilot holes for the rails, and then our drawer guide holes. And that's the right side. There's our drawer bottom. This is Zargan, so we're grooving the bottom for the Zargan drawer. And there's our drawer end. Again, we've got the 10mm holes to assemble the Zargan drawer. We've got our edge banding indicator to band this edge down here. And we've got a pilot hole to tie this drawer back to the drawer bottom. And if this part gets wide enough, this one hole goes away and there becomes 2. I'm not going to be able to see what I'm picking over here if I don't slide that back a little bit. Okay, here's a nailer, and we do see in this one that we do have a pilot hole here now where we can tie that nailer to the top rail so that this nailer doesn't conform to the wall. It stays flat when we screw it to the stud. It doesn't just suck up to the wall. But also, again, if this cabinet gets wide enough, these single holes go to 2 holes. This middle hole goes away, and there's 2 that's a third and a third as far as the math on it goes. And then there's our rail, and some of these have been renamed. All the rails now are just called rails. We have a rail 1 back and a rail 1 front. That just means it's at the top of the cabinet, and then the next one down would be 2, and we'll see that in some of these others. So this cabinet has a back, a bottom. There's our left side, and here we're seeing that we have a mid rail. So this rail has an indicator, same scratched line we use for fixed shelf we're using as an indicator for the rails, and then our pilot holes for this mid rail. And all of that had been turned off except for the one drawer under the top drawer. In this case, this one would have been working, but in all the other cabinets it would not. But there's our drawer guide holes. And other side, drawer bottom, drawer end. And now I'm just going to kind of scan and look for parts that are unique. Okay, so here we have now 3 rails, front, number 1 at the top back, number 1 at the top front, and then number 2 under those drawers we saw where that indicator was. Now this cabinet, I'm going to go to the next cabinet because it has 3 drawers. So I think it starts somewhere right in here. Yeah. So now this one's got a rail 1, which is at the top back, and then top front, and then rail 2 under drawer 1, and rail 3 under drawer 2. And then when we look at the sides for this cabinet, I'm not sure if they're above it or below it because I can't see the. Yeah, here's what we were just seeing. So there's the top front pilot holes for the rail, and there's the top back, and then this is rail 2, and this is rail 3. And so if you've got locks in any of these drawers, now you have something to put your strike on. I'm also planning on, in version 10, coming into these rails and giving you an option to, this will be the edge banded edge here, so you'll be able to control the distance from the front edge back to a groove that you'll cut with your back groove. Instead of using a strike, you'll just use that groove to lock the drawer into, and it'll just run the full length. It'll just be a machining option that you'll choose it on the options, and when you do, it'll machine it on all the rails, and you'll just use it where you need to, but it'll machine it on all the rails. Alright, now let me just kind of scan. I really think that shows us everything we want to see here, but I'm going to scan through this list and see if I see anything else that might be interesting in the machining side of this. And of course, for manual guys, you're just getting all these rails now that weren't available before. You would have had to add them in Report Center. And drawer partitions. Of course, here, this particular cabinet was the cabinet where we had a drawer side by side. So we have a partition left and a partition right, and they just get sandwiched together. But that keeps the reveals, and you're not having to do anything fancy with your boring machine in the hardware department trying to share a rail. We just double the rail so that all of your boring for Zargan drawers or Nova Pro drawers or anything you'd be doing with a dovetail drawer, the drawer front is always centered on the drawer box regardless. By doing a double partition, just simplifies it. I don't think there's anything else we need to see there, so let's move on to the next cabinet type. These cabinets have been here for a while, for all you 232 guys. They're just bookcase cabinets, face frame bookcase cabinets, single opening, double opening. All of these parts behind this frame will machine just like any frameless box. You just have additional parts for the face frame, and then I've got the edge banding indicators turned off on these parts unless you tell it that you want the nosing or don't want the nosing on the front of the shelves. Typically we put a panel mold on the front of those shelves. When you turn the panel mold on, the shelves get shallower by the thickness of the panel mold. That's just a decorative hardwood part you're putting on there to make it look better, strengthen the shelf, but you don't need edge banding, so the edge banding indicator goes off when you turn that molding off, and the edge banding on, and then the edge banding comes back on if you turn that molding off, and then the shelves are deeper. So what I'll do, just so you can see that, is I'll take this one and say I don't want the upper. No, that's not it. Let's see. I may have already done it. Add shelf edgings. I've already done it. Alright, and let's see if it's on this one, so as we look at the parts we can see that. Yep. So we see here that the add face frame. Oh, that's the face frame. There it is. Add shelf edgings is on. So as long as that add shelf edgings is on, then we should see that the shelves in this one are shallower than the shelves in this one, and these won't have edge banding indicators. But also, let me close that just for a second. This is going to be two cabinets behind one frame, and this is going to be one cabinet behind one frame. Again, we want to keep these cabinets as simplistic as possible. Slide these up where you can see as much of it as possible. That's the crown mold. So these rails are going to cut, but there is no template for them because we don't want any additional machining on them. So the rail is there. It's just kind of hard to see. And cap molding, same way. It's just going to be something on the list. But this is an internal bookcase nailer. This nailer doesn't want any machining on it because it's inside the bookcase and gets. You just have to know that one edge gets banded. It's actually on the nested pattern and on the cut listing that one of these edges needs to be banded. But this is a part you see inside the bookcase, goes at the top and bottom, and then we have this 76mm nailer inside the cabinet in front of the back, and then we have this 108mm nailer behind the back. And so this part is not seen and this part is seen. It's inside the cabinet. This part is outside the cabinet or behind the back where it's never seen. And because this one is 108 tall and this one is 76 millimeter tall, then if this were at the top of the cabinet, or let's just say it's at the bottom of the cabinet since that's our orientation here, that 108 millimeter nailer would be running somewhere through there, and we can run screws just above this, and then we put a panel mold to cover those screw holes, and then we just pad nail that panel mold on. So if we needed to, we've got blind fasteners at that point. We've screwed the cabinet to the wall, but we've covered up our fastening system with a decorative piece of molding that we can just pop back off with a putty knife or a chisel if we need to remove this cabinet for any reason and back those screws out. So that's the internal nailer, and this is the external nailer or behind the back nailer, and then one of this molding right here. Again, it's just on the list. It's not nested, obviously, so it's just on the list of things to cut. Is same length, would cover up those holes. It's another style and rail. Okay, here's our wall adjustable shelf, and again, here's another thing unique to True 32 is that we've got two little, and these are just indentations in this part, but this is the cabinet that we told we don't want the shelf edging. So these shelves are only 6 millimeters shallower than the cabinet opening in depth, and we have an edge banding indicator to band this front edge of the shelf. But we also have these two dots telling the finish guy to finish both sides of the shelf, not just one. Many other parts that we deal with off of the plywood parts, the exterior parts, the parts for finished interior cabinets and exterior parts only need to be finished on one side. This is telling them they need to finish both sides, where that arrow for the blind panel is telling them to finish the other side. There's our back, there's our sides, and there's our pilot hole for our nailer that's behind the back. We don't put a pilot hole for the other one because it's put in the field with brad nails, just nailed into the other one. There's our other side, reverse side. Because we don't have a bottom, there's no pilot holes at the bottom, but there are pilot holes at the top for the top. And then let's skip down to the next cabinet. And there's our wall adjustable shelf. Now you see there is no edge banding indicator because we've told it that we want that molding. So we don't need to edge band it to turn around and add a molding on top of it. But we also notice on these parts, if we look at the wall side left, let's go back up here to this. We should get this. Where was that? We see here that because we've turned that off, we don't have any edge banding indicators for these parts. It's just the cabinet number. I'm not sure you can see that. I hope you can. But it's cabinet number 1. But normally there's edge banding indicators. But because this is going behind a face frame, we don't need to band any of those parts. And the same thing for this one. And same thing for the top. We have a groove for the back, and we have a cabinet number, but we don't have an edge banding indicator for that cabinet because it's not going to get the, or it's going to get that molding. All right. Let's go to the next cabinet group. I think we're past halfway now. I want to deal with these freezes on a separate video. This is a pretty cool cabinet here, and I don't know of any other system that has something that is this unique. This cabinet is dealing with an outside 45-degree angle wall. And you see, I think you could see that pretty well there, what we're dealing with. So we've got a wall coming along, and it turns at a 45-degree angle. Instead of an inside angle, it's an outside angle. So, and this is actually two separate cabinets that we've joined. It's not difficult to do. Let me go ahead and erase this cabinet and erase this cabinet and add them back so you can see how it works. And these are the wall cabinets for the same unit. So I'm going to go to Base Special. That's where that cabinet lives. And we see here we got a miter front, right and left, and we see that it's telling us to place the right unit first. So we want to click on this wall so that we can place the cabinet that's on the right end first. Just double click that, say OK, and then click on the left wall, double click that, say OK. It knows the positioning is right to right or left to left. You're not having to do anything to get it done, but now we have that cabinet. It's a very unusual cabinet. When we go to parts, you can see some pretty unique parts here. And the base cabinet was somewhat working in the prior version, but the wall cabinet didn't even exist. So let me see if we can see. I hope we can see all of these parts. So there's our base adjustable shelf for a mitered front cabinet. Again, it's going to have a typical name of base adjustable shelf with a suffix of mitered. Each part is going to have that suffix on it. You can barely see that over here on the left side. But you see the unique shape of this part. Now, the manual guys are going to get a rectangle the size of this gray outline, and then the operations manual tells you how to make these really hard and cut. I mean, that's an easy cut, and this is an easy cut. This is not such an easy cut, at least on a table saw anyway. But on a router, this is just like any other cabinet. It's just no trouble at all. And we also see our edge banding indicator saying we want to edge band this edge, and then we see an edge banding indicator here telling us we want to edge band that edge. And we come to, here's our back, and it's the back parts are very small, and they have to have a beveled edge, and there's a note on your nested pattern or a note on your cut list to tell you you have to bevel those where they come together, because basically that back is sitting here and it needs to be back mitered 22.5, each of them on one long edge, and that's what it says on the cut list. Here we see the bottom and the leg leveler holes placement, and again our edge banding indicators and a cabinet number. And then here's our side panels, nothing unusual about those. And then there's our top. And same thing for the other cabinet, the right cabinet. So you see some pretty unusual parts there, very unusually shaped. Here's the upper unit, and you see we're having to notch for the suspension blocks just on one side of the back. And then there's our bottom. That was our adjustable shelf there. Back, bottom, and then there's our left side, and then there's our well, it's our top. So, and as we get a little further down, there's our other back notched out of the other side, and then our opposite end. So it's a very unusual cabinet, but actually very convenient for that particular application, in that you've got this outside corner to deal with. And very easy to place and very accurate cut listing, and there are instructions on how to deal with that cabinet in the operations manual for True32 users. And let's go to the next one. Alright, this one is, I've spent a lot of time here. And we spent just a few minutes with these a moment on one of the previous videos, but I want to try to go over how all this works. When we were looking at the warming drawer and microwave base cabinets, a lot of these same principles apply. But we've got a group of cabinets here that some are new. This one has been in the True32 library for a good while. This one's been in the True32 library for a good while. This one's been in the True32 library for a good while. This one's only been in since the version 9. These three are brand new, just put in there in the last few weeks. This one has been in the special group for a good while, but I didn't know anyone was using it, and someone expressed a need for it. I would hate to have to pick that up if it was built from melamine, but I did go ahead and work on the parts for it. So just to give you an idea what's going on with these cabinets, they are unique. These cabinets typically would get a wall cabinet above them, all of these here. And if we're looking at our tall cabinet group, this tall oven upper is sized based on whatever you've put into your startup standards, so that it'll just position itself properly and be the right height based on all of your startup standards. But what's happening here is we actually have a vertical rail here and here in case our appliance covers some portion of that area. If we just had a 19mm rail at the top and a bottom fixed shelf, then we probably would get in trouble with our drawer hitting our drawer, or stick up past the top and hit the doors on the bottom of the upper, the bottom of the doors on the upper cabinet. So we've got a rail there. And when we look at the cabinet dialog for one of these cabinets, again, we've ordered the questions here in the order of the cabinet top to bottom. So the very first question after your standard height, depth, and from wall is rail over the microwave, and then the microwave oven height, and then the oven height, and then the rail below the oven height. Now, as you see, anytime you see the asterisk in calculation, that means these fields, you shouldn't type in them, that they calculate based on all the other entries you're making. Typically for an oven cabinet, the only two fields you're going to be entering anything into would be your microwave opening based off of the specification and your oven opening based off the specification. And then once you've done that, you click in another field and let it do the math. If these rails are not 52 millimeters or larger, then you would make your drawer front smaller until these rails got to something above 52 millimeters. You might be able to pull off 48 or something like that, but again, you want to try to come through this side panel with a couple staples and then a screw, and the smaller that gets, the less opportunity you have to do that to secure that rail. The rail doesn't really hold any weight or do anything other than give you your oven a place to land. So it's just a decorative piece. These cabinets will also all get a note on them that the edge banding of the, even though these applied in panels, if your interior is melamine, will be cut from melamine, they'll have a note to put veneer edge banding on them, because you're going to see the edge banding above the oven and between the oven and the drawer, and where it interfaces with this rail. This rail will be cut from exterior material, whatever your applied ends and toe kick and that, those parts are cut from. Or it could be hardwood if you wanted to. You have control over them, but you want them to be something of the exterior material. So then once you get there, you also control, and this field here is the oven drawer, from the oven, between the oven and the drawer reveal. So this reveal is the distance from the top of the drawer to the bottom of the oven. So I'm going to do another zoom to show you, just zoom in on that one cabinet. Well, actually, I want to zoom in on this one. This one's a little more detail about it. And then I'm going to turn it to level 4 so you can really see all this stuff. So this one has a 56 millimeter top rail, a 56 millimeter mid rail, a 494 opening for the microwave, a 717 opening for the oven, a 76 millimeter rail below the oven, a 246 millimeter opening here, and a 19 millimeter bottom. And if we turn the doors off, you can see that this opening is properly identified now. Again, that was broke for a number of years. It was a problem in KCD, and I was able to get with John Murphy and work through that and get that solved. So we now have all of these dimensions are correct. And so we see this part is 76, but because we set that reveal to 56, this drawer is laying on top of that 20 millimeters. And you can set this to only show 19 millimeters if you want to. I typically, the default is going to be to try to keep the reveals of each of these three the same. Where we've got 56 showing here, 56 showing here, we might have a 76 millimeter rail, but we're only seeing 56 of it. But you have control over it. The fields you can't type into are the rails themselves. They're going to calculate, and you can, but as soon as you type in these fields, then all the math is broken. At that point, you've got to do the math to make sure it works. Once you type in these fields from that point forward, you could actually have something in here that no longer works. But if you'll work with this drawer front height and your two opening heights, the microwave and the oven, just exclusively stay with those, it's going to work for you. You're not going to have any problems. You just change those and work from there. Now, another thing that's a little bit unique about this newest version of these oven cabinets is we now have the ability to turn on a warming drawer icon and get rid of the drawer parts. So if I set this to 1 equals yes and say OK, now we have a warming drawer icon. Now, this opening is probably wrong, most likely. So at that point, we've got to determine how we want to go about taking care of that, and we probably want to make this rail 56. So at that point, we've got to break the calculation. So we want to make sure we understand what we want to do first, get everything done except for changing that rail, and the very last thing we do is change that rail to give us that proper opening. And there's really no way around that. If you want to use a warming drawer, you're going to have to do the math on the whole cabinet if you want that rail to be anything other than what it's self-calculating to be, because that is a calculating field. But you can now have a warming drawer icon in there, and you can now toggle it on and off. And it will probably cover some portion of that rail. If you wanted to leave that at 76, the two of them, it may not end up being the same reveal you have there and there, but it probably would be acceptable. Because usually the warming drawers don't cover anything on the bottom, and they cover sometimes as much as 1.5 inches on the top every now and then. Depends on what brand and what model number. But that's new to this new version of these ovens. Now let's go to the cut listing for these cabinets, and so I can show you some of the other unique features of them. Let's go to level 2, go to parts, and I spent a lot of time on the machining part of it for the CNC guys, but also the size of the parts for the manual guys. Alright, let me slide this over. And hopefully I'm going to be able to see what I'm choosing here is the drawer bottom. Again, we talked about when the drawer gets a certain width, we get pilot holes. This is a drawer back, edge banding indicator, and then we get 2 pilot holes here to tie that drawer bottom to the back. I'm not going to be able to see what I'm picking here because I've gotten that slid off the screen, so I'm just going to pick them. That's a nailer that goes at the top. Now, there is no back in these stacked oven cabinets. So they get a nailer at the top and bottom, and we've now got a pilot hole in this nailer to tie it to the top and the bottom. So that pilot hole allows you to run a screw through this nailer into the top, and I've had to change the depth of the top and the depth of the bottom to accommodate for that. And here's our fixed shelf. So our fixed shelf is actually the same depth as our top, but the fixed shelf goes all the way flush to the back of the cabinet, and there's our edge banding indicator, although that's not necessary, but we still do it just out of habit more than anything else. But this part has a rail in front of it, but goes all the way flush to the back of the cabinet, where our top, when we get to, and this is our top, and there's our edge banding indicator there, this part has a nailer behind it, and a rail in front of it, so it's even shallower than that fixed shelf because it's got both a rail in front of it and a nailer behind it. And then the bottom, now there's our side. We see our hinge holes. There's our score line for our fixed shelf. There's our pilot holes for our fixed shelf. There's our pilot hole for our rail, mid rail, and there's our pilot hole for our top rail. Pilot holes for the top. Pilot holes for the bottom, pilot holes for the lower nailer, and pilot hole for the upper nailer. This is for cabinet number 1, and then we have our edge banding indicator there telling that we want to edge band the bottom and face, but not the top, since we're going to be stacking this cabinet. And then that's the reverse side. I didn't see the bottom. I'm going to slide that over so I can back. And there's the bottom. So there's the bottom with the pilot holes, but this part's going to be the same size as that fixed shelf, but it comes flush to the front, but has a nailer behind it, where the fixed shelf has a rail in front of it and nothing behind it. So they actually end up being the same size, they're just in different positions on the cabinet. But I've readjusted all the sizing on the oven cabinets to make all of that work. Then when we get to, let's just kind of, you also see that these parts are identified differently than other tall cabinets in that they're oven bottoms and oven fixed shelves and oven tops, OFX, instead of T for tall bottom. Get past these first 3, and then we'll see that there's a little bit of unique machining for the this is the one that has 2 shelves because there's a rail in between. Again, we've got pilot holes and score lines and pilot holes for rails, all of that. We get to these next new cabinets. This one, the back is only as tall as it actually has a back in it because there's doors at the bottom, so we've got a back. This is turned sideways, so this is the bottom and this is the top, and it's for cabinet number 4. But this back is only going from the bottom of the bottom to the top of the fixed shelf, and then above that is the oven, and it's preferable not to have a back in those cabinets so we don't have to deal with electrical. We just screw the cabinet up, to the wall and not have to worry about cutting out boxes and things. There's the bottom for that cabinet, fixed shelf. And then as we get to these new cabinets, we're seeing here we have a fixed shelf, and this one is 2 drawers. And the next one is the same thing with 3 drawers. So again, we have a fixed shelf and then drawer guide holes for 3 drawers. And then the next one's 4 drawers. And then this last one, again, I'm not using it, but it is a you know, 24, 14, whatever, 8 foot tall cabinet, 7 foot tall cabinet, whatever your wall height is. This is the full height. But I've got it basically working like the others, except that this one does need a back in it. You just got to cut out for electrical or whatever, because it's got to have a back up here, and it probably needs a back down here. And I don't know that you could handle the cabinet without breaking it without a back. So it has a full back in it. And so these fixed shelves run from the back to the back of the rail, and then the top runs from the very front to the back, and then there's a nailer behind it that ties into it, and this nailer comes in behind the bottom and ties into it. So it's a pretty strong cabinet when you get done, and then you've got pilot holes to tie the nailers, but it is a really big cabinet and a really heavy cabinet. And I think that's the next to last cabinet group we want to look at. Again, I apologize for the length of this video. Hopefully none of the others will be this long. And now we're to our pie cut cabinets, and none of these other groupings are really that relevant, but this one is. So here we've got pie cut upper, pie cut upper, pie cut base, pie cut base, pie cut base, pie cut base. This first wall of pie cut bases is the 2-piece here, and this second wall is the 1-piece. Now on the screen they look the same from above, and however you look at them, they all look the same, but this is actually a cabinet that runs from here back to there with an end panel here and an end panel here, and then this is a cabinet without a left end panel. It's got a right end panel and a full top, and a full bottom, but no left end panel, and it gets either wafered or use mending plates or biscuits or you know, pocket holes, however you want to screw those two cabinets together, and you can actually do that in the field. The last time I used one, that's what I did, is I took these two cabinets out independently and screwed them together on the job site. But these cabinets are different in that one is 2-piece and one is 1-piece, and by looking at the parts we can see that. So jump in here. Alright, so we've got, we'll be able to see these. Slide number too far. It's a shelf, and it's fairly long because it's the 1-piece unit. And then there's the shelf for the second partial piece, and this shelf, the parts had to be adjusted so that, you know, it's a little longer or wider than normal, because it's got to come from the left end panel of the, or from the right end panel of the half cabinet over to meet the shelf that's shallower, 6 millimeters, 8 millimeters, whatever you got that set to. It's got to come over and meet that, and I've got the math in there where it reads that setting so that it'll add it to that shelf width so they can meet, so you can put the mending plates on it, or biscuits, or pocket holes, however you want to join the two together. There's our back, I believe. Yes, that's the back on the big cabinet, and there's the back on the small cabinet. Now the back on the small cabinet, if I slide this over, we'll see that it's not 7 millimeters thick, it's 19 millimeters thick, and it's full height. So it's basically a plant-on back, and I've adjusted the top and bottom depth so that this part aligns flush to the side panel of the other cabinet. And then there's our bottom, and again we've got the same setting on here where these holes can bore all the way through or not. Same thing there. Really nothing unusual here on the end panels, other than I do have the hinging working right. If you don't have the door hinged, there won't be hinge holes, and prior to this version that was not the case. The hinge holes were just always on, whether it got a hinge or not, and sometimes you found yourself putting a hinge plate on and then having to pull it back off once you started nailing the cabinet together. This cabinet does not. It has a typical bottom, but it only has a partial top, so that you can kind of get in here and install it in a nailer and no rail back here. It makes it a little easier to get in here and install it. So it's a 180 millimeter partial top. It gives you something to tie the Lazy Susan to, but doesn't go all the way. And again, you have control over these hinge placements for any odd hinge. Of course, this would be a typical hinge, so you wouldn't need, but you have control over it if you need it. It's the right of the same thing. And then this is the one for the half box, in that at this, it has the full top and full bottom. So it's got pilot holes for both, and then it's got to get a full back all the way down through here instead of just a nailer. So, and I thought the nailer holes would be sufficient to hold that. I didn't add additional machining to that. And then there's probably your top for your half box. I believe we already saw the bottom. And then there's our nailer for the full box, and your nailer for the partial box. Or no, that's that top. Alright, and I can't tell what that is. I think it says the shelf. So this is the second cabinet, so let's skip past that. Let me go over here so I can kind of see. I want to skip over to a one piece. Here we go. Alright, so this pie cut cabinet is treated, well, that's an upper. Let me go to a base. There's a little more detail about a base. Cabinet number 5. Here we go. So here's our pie cut base shelf. Again, this is going to be a little difficult to edge band, and there were no edge band indicators in KCD to actually tell us to do that and that. I could come in here and come behind the numbers, but I could see some operator banding this back edge and this edge over here if we did that, since everywhere else the indicators are wrapping around the number appropriately. And when I talked to John Murphy at KCD, this is what they said they were doing, basically saying from here to here, which tells you these two edges. So that made enough sense to me to know that it's this side of the number, so it's here, not back here, and it is here and here, basically covering from this point to that point. So that worked for me, and hopefully it works for you. There's back 1, back 2. There's our bottom. Again, these machine holes will machine through if you have your option turned on, and they won't if you have your option turned off. Then it'll groove for the backs. And this cabinet was really challenging because these parts get inverted as far as the top and the bottom goes. They're mirror images of each other, so I had to do a left and had to do a right. Here we don't have nailers, so we don't have nailer holes because we have full tops and full bottoms. So we don't need nailer holes for those. And then we have a very large diagonal corner support. Again, this diagonal corner support would be the same size as it would be for a diagonal cabinet. Not helpful with a pie cut, but it would be helpful if you happen to have a pie cut and a diagonal on the same job and you were a manual guy. Once you made that setup, you could make both cuts, or all three cuts, the front of the diagonal, the back of the diagonal, and the back of the pie cut, all at one time from one single setup. So that's how that works. And again, here, this is next cabinet, adjustable shelf, back, bottom. So that's the last cabinet, and I wanted to go through those cut listings, show you all the benefits of the 232 machining, where we have part indicators, edge band indicators, things that are very helpful in the machining process for anyone working in a cabinet company with CNC. Those things are very, very helpful. No labels needed. The operator gets the information he needs right off the part, and he's able to be edge banding while the machine is machining the next sheet, because he has instructions and he's not having to read other things, an operations manual or something like that, to accomplish his task. Also, in these cabinets, the shelves have been turned off in previous versions. They're now turned back on, so you can have shelves if you want, or you can turn them off. The default when you drop the cabinet is no shelf, because we do assume that it's going to have a Lazy Susan in it. Someone requested that, so we made the default no shelves, and then you turn them on if you want them, however many you want. So that's the conclusion of this video, and we'll hope to see you on another video soon. Thanks a lot.